Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for a very special screening of The Goddess Project in honor of International Women's Day. This was a film that was produced, directed, and edited, and production designed, and many other things by a current student in our production program, Holli Rae. So Holli will be back to talk about making this film together with SCA professor Lisa Leeman once we wrap screening the film. The movie runs about 101 minutes, and we're going to run it all live here during the webinar. As usual, if you have questions that you'd like to ask of the filmmakers, just put them in the Q&A box, and we'll probably call on some people live, and we'll read out loud some other questions just to do a bit of a hybrid for the Q&A. But I hope that you enjoy the film, and please stick around for the Q&A to follow.
Nice to meet you too.
Wow, that end credits song is such an anthem. There's so much joy and energy to it. It's still sort of filling my spirit. So before we start, I just wanted to say to you and to everybody, happy International Women's Day. And I looked it up, the history of International Women's Day, and it said this year's theme is choose to challenge, to inspire individuals to challenge biases, question stereotypes, and celebrate the achievements of women around the world. So what a great thing to be doing here tonight with you. So I guess I'd like to start at the beginning, which is like, wow, you took us on such a journey. You guys went on such a journey. Could you just talk to me about how, I think you said you guys both dropped out of school to make this film? And like, I guess what I'm curious about is how much of it, did you have a plan when you hit the road? How much of a plan did you have? Did you think you were making this kind of a documentary?
Yeah, so to kind of start, I guess we did somewhat have a plan in that our plan was that we knew there was a lot of stories and representation missing in media, and it frustrated us enough to the point where even though we didn't have all the skills, even though we had never made a feature film before, even though we didn't have any money or a vehicle or anything, we found ourselves complaining about it enough to the point where we were like, we need to do something about this. We can't just talk about this. We can't just wait for Universal or Paramount or someone else to make this one day. We want to see these stories. Everyone we know wants to see more representation. So let's do it. Let's take a leap. And that was like, Kickstarter was becoming pretty popular. And I had seen someone like fundraise a fashion brand, a friend of mine, and I thought maybe we could do this for a film. And I think it was really launching that campaign and then having people that we didn't know, like total strangers from around the world, support us, that really gave us that confidence to say, okay, we're not the only ones that want something like this. Like, we have like sort of a responsibility to make it happen. So I was in school at the time studying visual communications and did drop out of a scholarship to make this movie, and sold everything I had and moved into a bus. And yeah, it's funny watching the film because at this point it's kind of gone further than I ever expected. We were able to screen it in some Regal cinemas and AMCs and festivals in different countries, and I've had the opportunity to travel with it and stuff. And I just never foresaw that we could be capable of that, but I just felt like this sort of inner responsibility is the only way I can describe it, and like a gut feeling of like, this is something that I need to do.
Well, and I want to talk to you in a bit about the distribution and the release of the film, but first, and the whole life cycle of the film. But so I am curious, in documentary, it's always sort of a mix between having a plan, having perhaps a central question to ask, or having some vision of it. And so having never made a doc before, how did you guys approach it? Did you know right away you wanted to interview a variety of women around the country, or what was your initial intention and how did that change?
Yeah, so our initial intention was to sort of document as many different types of women, as many different ages, careers, beliefs, religions as we could. But then we also foolishly decided to like try to make a feature film and live in a school bus in the hot summer without like a bathroom or amenities at all. And so like so much of who we ended up filming came to us, as you sort of see in the film, but I feel like is missing a little bit, just the spontaneity of all of it. Like we truly had that bus, and everywhere we went, people would see it and stop us and ask what we were doing. And we would say, we're looking for like role models in your community. Can you recommend anyone? And it was truly like a word of mouth thing. So in the beginning, we knew we wanted to like sort of like cast as wide of a net as possible. And I feel like, you know, in the end, of course, everyone has things like you could have, should have, would have done, but there's so many people and types of women that I feel like are missing from the film. But then again, you can only fit so much. But yeah, that is some criticism, like, you know, why didn't you have a truck driver? Why didn't you have a Native American woman? And it's like, we went on the reservation, you know, we were trying, but there's certain circumstances and stories that we just couldn't get. But yeah, as far as like the questions, you know, now studying production and looking at how most people do documentaries, it's so different than what we did. Definitely just kind of stem from our own experiences and struggles, and then like the women we knew and what they went through. And then we really left it open-ended to each person to say, like, what do you feel most called to talk to? You know, if you could reach like the whole world, all the women and girls in the world, and men, you know, and people of all genders, like, what do you want to say? What's the message that you feel is most important? So while that was amazing because we got like this wide variety of topics, when it came to posts, that was also really challenging because we just had sort of every subject under the sun.
Well, we'll get to that. And I mean, I thought that you found a good structure. A lot of people will say that, you know, structure is the key to documentary, having a sort of organizing principle. And you created these chapters and the great graphic of the scrapbook, so to speak. So did you have that idea in mind, or did those chapters, did you have it in mind when you were filming women, or did they come later in post?
They definitely came later. So what we did was sort of like, it took us, we hand transcribed the whole film, and we had over 300 hours of footage. So it took us like over a year just to transcribe the footage. And then what we did was sort of like put all the gold, as we called it, into a notebook and highlighted it. I'm sure people are familiar with this process, but then to actually come up with the chapters, we made a giant bubble map. And I wish I had a picture of it right now, but it was like 6 by 10 feet. We had to strap it to the top of the car after printing it at Kinko's, but that was truly the only way where we could figure out how to take all of these subjects and put it into one thing. And then we sort of like took each snippet and thought like, what type of chapter could this go under? And then that's when we came up with the sort of 10 chapter structure of things that we felt like most people could relate to or had as parts of their life or their own history.
Wow, I'm just blown away that you transcribed it all yourselves. That's such an arduous task. I mean, it certainly helps you to internalize the material deeply when you do that, but wow. Well, I would love to ask you to talk about the animation and the graphics. It sounds like you have some sort of background in graphic design, and I really appreciated the animation and so many different kinds of animation. And then I saw in your end credits that you had a number of different animators, which of course makes sense. So I'm curious, like, when did the idea to animation come to you guys? At what point in the filmmaking, and how did you approach that? Did you wait till you had an edit? Did you have animations created and then work with them? How did that all work?
Yeah, so from pretty early on, we knew that we wanted to incorporate animation. Both of us had always been like huge fans of film, but then also documentaries, but then also felt like most documentaries had so much potential to make such an impact and transform people's thoughts and reality, yet so many people can only pay attention to like a talking head on a screen, you know? So I feel like back, you know, when I first saw documentaries in my life, it was always just sort of like characters in this same room, with this spotlight on them or something and their title card, and then maybe some cheesy reenactment footage. And we knew that we didn't want that at all. And we wanted it to be something really captivating and modern feeling and multidimensional and multidimensional and relatable, so that someone could see one animation and it could remind them of their childhood or an anime they liked, or another animation, some paper dolls they made, so we really wanted to have like the most variety of artwork. It's so funny. It's like totally, we called it like a quilt, the film, because there's seriously everything like thrown into a mixing pot. But we knew from the beginning we wanted to have animation, and we knew we wanted to hire an all-woman crew. So everyone from the animator, we worked with I think 15 animators, the composer, the colorist, the sound designer, every single hat was borne by a female crew member. So that was something that also kind of extended our production time in making the film, because we actually went to go find these people and we're like, where are all the woman animators? We spent months on Vimeo looking for reels and just searching, and it turns out it was actually really hard to find. It seemed like also a super male dominated industry. So we actually end up building like a creative network of women in LA as a result, to find animators and source people for the project.
Any animators from USC?
No, actually, no, I don't think so.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you worked with each animator? Did they propose a style? Did you have a style in mind? Because there's so many different styles. There's cutouts, there's 2D. I don't even have the words to describe some of the different styles of animation. So how did that come about? How did you work with them?
So I think it really started with just looking at reels and saying, this is something that speaks to me. Like, I love animation and design. That's definitely something that sort of led me to filmmaking. But just seeing different types of art and saying like, this feels like it could, fit this story. So we would reach out to the animators. Because we had such a hard time finding them, we end up making our search global. So the artists are from all around the world, whereas like the interviews are all from our bus journey in the US. But that was also an interesting thing, which we did before this whole COVID thing. We worked very much virtually with a lot of them, never met them in person, never saw, just work through Google Drive and sharing WeTransfer, sharing things back and forth. We had sort of like color schemes and things that we like and samples of their work. And the film was pretty much locked before we started the animation, and it did evolve and change. Like the original.
Oh no. Holli, are you still
there? A lot
there?
of animation. We lost a lot of great stories and more.
Holli, we're having a little bit of trouble with your internet connection. Try turning off your camera just for a little bit to get our audio back in sync. Oh, there you are.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it's been kind of going in and out today. I'm not sure. Usually it's pretty good. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's perfect now. Well, I'm currently making a documentary and I'm looking for animators. So I would love your list if you're sharing it, because I really love the animation so much in your film. So I wrote down, you said 10,000 miles, 200 nights, 100 women, 3 hours of footage. It's such an incredible journey. And again, before we get into more about the editing and then the distribution of the film, I'd like to know, you said that you learned how to interview as you went. And can you talk to us about that? What were the lessons? Where did you screw up, or how did you learn this, and how did you teach yourselves?
Absolutely. We knew we wanted it to feel like a conversation like we're having now, which I think kind of gets to be a challenge sometimes, especially like in the more advanced forms of film production, because you have all your lights and your gear and, the subject themselves, because it's a documentary, they're not actors. So the camera can make them really uncomfortable or self-conscious or nervous. So from the beginning, we knew we wanted to have super minimal equipment that was almost invisible. So we only used natural light. We didn't use any lighting or anything. We used like a small Zoom recorder and a pretty small camera. And yeah, we just sort of figured it out as we went. We truly did. And I interviewed every time, and my partner who I made the project with was a camera operator. And I think it just was very much trial and error, but something that I think about now when it comes to like people asking me advice about making a documentary or interviewing people is really to be vulnerable with the person yourself. So I feel like that is my personal interview style, is sort of like sharing something that's personal about me, or a challenging experience I went through, or even something saying so much about like I'm nervous being on camera too, you know, something like that, but just sort of like establishing common ground. Because I feel like with film a lot of times, and particularly documentary, it's like the person feels very intimidated by this film crew or these established professionals. I think the fact that we weren't professionals and we were just sort of like these two girls making a movie made people feel more comfortable too, because so many people have seen the film and said to me, I've never seen such like raw emotion on screen before. And I think the equipment and our interview style and just sort of like the unintimidation factor of us just being sort of naive really helped to make that the case.
I mean, it was beautiful how they talked about vulnerability. You know, I'll share a really short story, which is that a couple of years ago, I was invited to Sundance. They have a producers summit every summer before COVID. And there were 16 of us documentary producers. It was specifically for producers, sitting in a circle. And Tabitha Jackson, who was now the head of the festival, but then was the head of the doc program, said to us something I'd never heard anyone say before professionally. She said, I invite you all, producers, to be vulnerable this weekend. And I just thought it was such a remarkable thing. You know, you never hear that in the professional world. And it does create a heart connection if you can allow yourself to be vulnerable. So because this is a film school, can you talk a little bit about what equipment you did use? And it is really a key to use small, unintimidating gear can really help to build bonds with people that you're interviewing. So what did you guys shoot on? Yeah,
you're gonna laugh. This is something most people would never assume, but it was a Canon T3i DSLR. So I think in total it cost like $1,000. And it's really funny because at one point the film was like one of the screenings I had to go to for a Q&A. It was next to like the new Beauty and the Beast. And I just sat there to myself that day and I thought, oh my God, like this is just proof that anyone can do anything, you know, like it's pretty remarkable that we were able to, you know, it's not about your equipment. I know, especially, you know, some of my peers, they're so concerned about which camera you shoot on and this and that. But at the end of the day, I think it's really about the story. For sure.
That's good for all our students to hear, because we all want to use good equipment, but ultimately it is totally about the story and the storytelling, the craft of storytelling. And you really did take us through a journey. So let's see, I had a couple other questions for you. There were some really powerful images. So there was a couple images that really stuck with me. One was the woman, African-American woman, who had parts of a dollar bill all over her face. It was talking about, I think, consumerism or influence, right? And so I was curious again, you know, was that something that she did as an artist? Is that something that you guys came up with? How did you work with those sort of interesting impressionistic visuals?
Yeah, so her in particular, that's a photographer out of Brooklyn that we met. We met her because she left a love note on our bus and said, I want to talk to you, and invited us to her studio. And she was an amazing collage artist, photographer. And that particular piece she had created prior, I don't know if it was prior to us interviewing her or between the interview and post, but she ended up letting us use the footage to sort of like help illustrate her story and the film. So a lot of this stuff, well, yeah, we produced a lot of it, and a lot of it was already made by the person speaking or one of the women in the film.
And I guess I'm curious, the content is so far ranging, you know, I can imagine what an editing conundrum it was. How long was the edit, by the way?
Like, how long did it take us, or the
Yeah.
first? Honestly, like 3 years, I think.
You know, it's not uncommon. I've spent 2 years editing feature docs before, and then this is when it's so word driven, it doesn't surprise me. And I think you found the sweet spot with the sort of the narrative journey that you take us on. But I'm curious, on your road trip, you know, it sounds like it was really open-ended. You were actually inviting the women to share with you what they wanted to, which is, again, very counterintuitive to the way that we train people to make documentaries, right? So, but I'm curious, did you have any surprises? You know, I don't know if you had any expectations. You seemed so open to whatever you encountered, but, you know, I'm curious, there must have been some surprises along the way.
Yeah, I mean, one thing in particular that I think is sort of touched on in the film, but as as Americans, I feel like we're not really encouraged to travel in the way that other people around the world are. Maybe more so now, but I feel like there's a lot of, it's just not something embedded into our culture. There's sort of like a lot of fear of the unknown or places we haven't been, preconceived notions, being outside of your comfort zone or uncomfortable. So that's something where uh, that I definitely felt, just sort of like fear of living in a bus, of sleeping in a new city every night, of not knowing if you're going to get robbed or broken into or have your equipment stolen or any of that. And we did encounter some difficult things, but I think for the most part, the thing that surprised me the most was just how open and supportive and excited people were to see what we were doing, to support what we were doing, to do anything they can. Like, there's so many people where we'd just be in a parking lot and some random like truck driver guy who you'd never expect said like, I looked up your website, I love what you're doing, I want to support you, and like, put a little $20 bill under the driver's thing, or just people that came in all along the way, from beginning to fundraising to post, to just support this. I think that surprised me the most, because you just, as a creative, I feel like putting yourself out there is really scary, and especially if you don't have resources or connections, and that's been the case my whole life. I've never known anyone in the film industry. I've never had like money to produce my own projects or fund any of my anything. Basically, everything I've ever done has been like very DIY and bootstrapped, and it's entirely relied on like other people supporting me, and that's been a challenge. Just as like the creative, to deal with the business and the fundraising and all of that. But the biggest surprise has just been like how many people are not only wanting to help you fulfill a vision or a dream, if it's something that's for the greater good, but like actively excited about supporting artists to make their art.
Do you feel comfortable sharing a bit about either what your budget was or how much you raised crowdfunding? I know that's something students face all the time, trying to crowdfund.
Yeah, so initially, the first crowdfunding campaign we raised like about $11,000 almost. And that we thought would make the feature film and help us travel from LA to New York in a bus and back for 6 months. And we were just naive, to say the least. We thought if we, travel on vegetable oil, then we could save gas money, and it helped. But by the time we got to New Orleans, we completely ran out of money. And it was actually a short way I'll say it, but reaching out to Eve Ensler, the playwright, on Twitter and getting a grant from her that helped us continue. She just serendipitously responded to one of our tweets, who, people tweet at her thousands of times a day, but she just happened to respond and give us a grant that helped us get to New York and back to LA. But by the time we got back from our trip, we had no money to make the movie. So we had to have another crowdfunding campaign, and we raised about just over 50,000 the second time. So I think all in all, we'd also like sold all of our belongings, and we'd like sew clothes and sell them on the road, and just sort of like do anything we could to make money to fund this. It was about 100,000, maybe a little less, to make the project.
Wow. Do you have any tips for our students in crowdfunding? Because crowdfunding is you can put up a great campaign, but unless you get eyes to the page, you don't really raise the money, right? So how did you guys manage to raise that much money online?
Yeah, because we didn't have like a pre-existing network or audience,
Yeah.
we weren't like big YouTubers or anything like that that just already had eyes on anything we were putting out. One thing that we did that was super helpful during I believe it was the second campaign, but we released a short film, like sort of like a short film that ended up going somewhat viral. That was about women's empowerment and body image. So it was related to the documentary, but it wasn't part of the documentary. And that's called Shine, the Goddess Project Shine short film. You can look that up, but it was basically about body image. And that brought crazy traction to us from major media outlets, and some of them would link our Kickstarter for our feature documentary into the articles that they wrote about this film we produced. So that was a major thing that I would recommend, is like maybe put something small out, like a teaser, and then reaching out to publications. And I think what a lot of people don't know, especially as creatives, you don't realize how much PR goes into film and every release anyone does. Like no one really puts things out and it goes viral. You really have to prepare. So if you're going to put something out there, especially a Kickstarter campaign or a short film, you need to prepare and send it to press outlets like a month in advance minimum, because they schedule their calendar of what they're going to talk about and things. So that's something I would really recommend, is like think of all the places that might support you, whether it be a nonprofit that's aligned with your mission of your film, or community organizations or big corporations, soap companies. We got sponsorships and support from so many different types of companies that you would never imagine. But if they have like a empowered mission or a social cause to their business, a lot of times they're looking for a tax write-off and they'll donate $10,000, $15,000. So that's another way we raise money, is just creating like partnerships and collaborations with brands that were like-minded.
The brands were eclectic. I remember Dr. Bronner's and Chai.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so were you guys also doing that yourselves, or did you have
Yep.
some people bring on someone just to do fundraising? Wow, you guys just did it all.
Yeah, the only time I ever hired a PR person, I really regretted it, because they just didn't do a good job, and they weren't meticulous about what they put out. So it ended up hurting us more than helping us. So unfortunately, yeah, I did all that myself too.
Wow. Let's see. Well, can you talk is there, before we get to distribution, maybe just talk a little bit more about how you guys really dealt with the editing, how you collaborated. Here at USC, we pride ourselves on collaboration. I have co-directed. It is not easy to co-direct. So I'm curious how you guys navigated that whole process, especially when it wasn't like a traditionally scene-driven film where it wasn't a spelling bee. You weren't following a natural narrative arc, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a huge challenge. The process of having a creative partnership that starts as a friendship and then goes into a business, and owing a lot of people a product, it became really challenging and taxing. And just even the process of trying, Kickstarter, as most people know, if you don't raise the money, if your goal is 50,000, you can raise 49.999 and not get it. So the second Kickstarter campaign definitely really challenged us, like relationship wise. And then going into an edit beyond that was challenging too. But I think at the end of the day, like what got us through it was just always feeling like there was a bigger mission because there's so many times where we just wanted to give up, and like it just felt too overwhelming and challenging and unrealistic to accomplish, given our lack of experience and things. But I think staying organized as far as having that binder that I told you about, and the bubble map, and just as many different ways where we can organize our thoughts and stick to the mission of the film was really helpful.
And so I think in the end credits, it's said that your collaborator is Sarah, right? She shot the film and then you and someone else edited that. So how did that work?
Yeah, so well, originally the first cut of the film I edited with Sarah, and she was an editor before a camera operator. So she edited the beginning or the first cut of the film. And then what happened sort of later on in our distribution process is we were about to release the film. We had the premiere. We had this amazing distributor partnership lined up where we were going to screen in like 50 Regals and AMCs across the country. And at that point, they basically told us that the film was too long and that we needed to cut it down. And
Holly, how long was it at that
that
point?
was 2 hours and 22
Oh, wow.
minutes. So it was too long. We just had no clue because we'd never done it before. And so at that point, we had to make a decision, and she didn't want to cut the film at all. She just sort of wanted to be done and like move forward. She actually ended up pursuing nursing after this, and is now a nurse and not a filmmaker at all. So this project, I think, kind of broke her open creatively and made her realize that film wasn't, like, she wasn't cut out for film, basically, that nursing was her path. So then I went in and edited the second cut myself, and then with an assistant who happened to be like a family friend that taught me how to edit in the course of a week to make the shortened version.
Well, if there's any message to your film, it's to follow your passion, right? And so that's what your collaborator did.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Was nursing on her horizon before you guys did this journey?
Kind of, but not really. No, I think she truly thought that she was going to do film forever. But then I think, I don't know what struck the chord in her, but I felt she just felt a responsibility to, pursue that path in her life.
Well, so we'll get to questions soon. Let's see, it's 8:15. So why don't you talk a little bit about how did you approach distribution? And you said you had a premiere, are you open to sharing who you were going to partner with? And, I think that's often a mystery, especially to students, how that works.
Yeah, there's actually two things that I'll say that I feel pretty passionate about shining a light on. So one of the first companies we partnered with was called Gather Films. They're still very much active. And it started out great. They were very social impact focused in the way they approached us and the distribution plan. And then about, I don't know how many months into it, we had gotten a Google alert, which is something that I suggest filmmakers set up for your films, because then you'll get an alert anytime like a media or press or someone talks about it. But that there was all these screenings happening in a museum in Massachusetts, like a massive museum. And long story short, end up finding that they were booking events behind our backs and stealing thousands of dollars from the project and never reporting any of these earnings or finances.
The platform was?
Gather Films was, yeah.
Oh, we worked with them on Awake. That's shocking.
Yeah, so that was one experience. And since then, there's been a Facebook group that someone created. Maybe you've heard of it, I'm not sure, but it's called Protect Yourself from Predatory Distributors and Aggregators. And anyone looking to distribute a film, I would definitely suggest joining that group, because it's basically just filmmakers who've had crappy deals and challenging distribution experiences talking to each other and giving advice. Because as you said, it's definitely something that people are very hush-hush about and don't really talk about, because I think money is complicated and relationships are complicated. And so that was a challenging thing. And from there, I went on to self-distribute the project myself and work with some aggregators and various platforms to get it on iTunes and Amazon, another platform called Gaia, which maybe you're on too.
Awake was on, yes,
yeah.
On Netflix first and then on Gaia. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, which I had a good experience with them, and I've had good experiences with a lot of different companies, but that one's one that, as like, an indie artist or like starving artist or whatever, it was so heartbreaking to go through, because we were just like barely paying back everything we invested into the project, and to have something like that really took the wind out of my sails for a couple
Might be
of months.
worth just really briefly explaining, for a lot of people won't know what Gather or Tug, those are two
Mhm.
platforms. Could you just explain briefly how those platforms work?
Yeah, so Tug, I believe, also went bankrupt this year. So like all these distributor companies, some of them have really good intentions, but they don't manage their assets and finances very well, and often aren't very transparent either. So yeah, Tug went under. I believe we work partner with them. They have a bunch of our merchandise that they never returned. They're also in that group, but both of those platforms were basically started as cinema on demand, which in its essence is a beautiful, incredible idea. And I wish someone would do it right, because I truly had like remarkable experiences in the beginning with these platforms. And they basically let people crowdfund movie theaters. So say you're in Florida and you have a local AMC or Regal Cinema, and you want to see the Goddess Project. These people had the ability to become movie captains or hosts, and then sell tickets to the event in order to sell out the theater. So I think we had a little over 50 different times where the film sold out, like in different theaters across the country. So that was amazing also, because it was just like, wow, these people are working to sell out entire theaters because they believe in this project so much. So yeah, I don't know if there's a new platform that exists like that, or if Gather is still working, but the model is very cool.
It is a great model, and especially it works best, I think, when a film has a core audience. You know, with Awake, we had many concentric circles of core audiences, but so do you, you know, in this film. So in that case, you have a lot of what you might call evangelists, you know, or super fans, as Peter Broderick calls them. And then they're easy to reach, and people really want to share a film they feel passionate about. So, all right, well, I have other things, but I think we should go to I see a bunch of questions in the Q&A. Alex, do you want to field some questions?
Yeah. Do you guys want to have some live interaction with some of the guests asking questions?
Sure.
Okay. So what I'll do then is, since it looks like we're probably only going to have to move over I think three people, because the rest are read out loud questions. I'll just bring everyone over at once, and that's Heather, Ariel, and Deborah. And let's start in that order. So Heather, we'll go to you first. After I bring you over, Ariel and Deborah, just keep your cameras off. And as soon as Heather's finished with her question, we'll call on you next. Okay, so just give me 1 second to go ahead.
This is great, Alex. This feels totally in the spirit of this film. This sort of populist spirit of
well, although it does look like it does look like we've lost to Heather. So Ariel will be the first. Okay, so feel free to jump in.
Can you hear me? My camera is still coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Well, I was really interested. Of course, my questions disappeared. I was really interested in what you said about how there haven't been enough good images for women in film that you've seen on the screen, and that was the whole reason we started Women Make Movies 50 years ago. And my question really has to do with how can we make more systemic change so that this problem doesn't continue to repeat itself generation after generation?
You want me to go ahead and answer that?
Oh, please, Holly. I might have
Okay.
to add that. Yeah.
So I think a big thing for me is just kind of like being the change that you want to see. You know, I go to a lot of events where, you know, Paramount or whoever's speaking, big execs and CEOs, and they're often saying things like, oh, we want to hire women, but we don't see the resumes on our desk, or that, you know, things like that. I just feel like a lot of people make excuses because it's just easier to hire or employ people that are around you and is more convenient. And, you know, I work on sets here in LA and, you know, in small capacities on real big projects and stuff. And I'm constantly shocked at how much TV and movies that we're watching right now are still filmed and created almost entirely by like older white men. And not to say there's anything against those men at all. They're obviously talented at their jobs, but I think it really comes to like stepping outside of your comfort zone. So for me, it was really challenging to only hire women animators or sound designers or composers or, you know, any of these roles. It took way longer. It cost more often, you know, but it was something that was so essential to this project that was the only option. So I actually end up making a group, which people in this chat or feel free to join. It's on Facebook and it's called Creative Women of LA Jobs and Collaborations. And I started this group specifically to create more representation for women in all creative industries in LA. And it's now grown to like 13,000 women who find jobs, and major media orgs come and, you know, are hiring from the group. So it's become an amazing resource for so many people in this town and in this industry. So that's like one major, you know, this is a group that I spend hours every day moderating and filtering through jobs and making sure that people are hiring ethically and, you know, being aware of their projects they're creating. So that's like one sort of personal mission of mine, is just to create more opportunities. And then I think beyond just women, you know, because there's so many people that feel left out of the conversation, whether it be, you know, disabled people or gay people or people of certain religions that aren't accepted here in the US, whoever you are. I think it's about like you creating your projects and then you filling the roles with the people that you want to see. And it's only by like bringing each other up that we're going to make any change. Like it's not one person's job or one person's role, but I think it definitely takes like that conscious effort to say like, we need to have different types of people on this set, behind the camera and in front of the camera. And I worked on a project for a nonprofit a little bit ago. And I remember one quick thing I'll share is that was a project that was amplifying women's voices and stories, sort of like talking about the Me Too movement. And for that, it was really important also to hire women for every role of that project. Because of the specific nature. And I remember at the end of the day, so many of the crew left without getting paid. And, you know, I wasn't paying them much, but in LA, like you need to eat. So I'm like, how'd they forget their checks? And so many, like 3 or 4 people texted me saying, oh my gosh, I forgot I was working. I felt so comfortable on this set surrounded by women for the first time in my life that I literally forgot this was a job. And I think it's about creating that safe space, not just where women feel comfortable, but where everyone feels comfortable to the point where it's a joyous experience to create and collaborate with people, and that people feel seen and heard.
I just second everything Holly said. I mean, I really do think it has a lot to do with the hiring, because when you open up who's telling the stories, then we tell wider variety of stories and stories about people like us, right? And also just Ariel, Women Make Movies, I bow down to you for co-founding it. Such a fantastic organization. Holly, could you say again, and maybe someone could put it in the chat, what is the name of the group you founded? And also could you say what the Facebook group is?
Yes, so I'll leave it in the chat, but it's called Creative Women of LA Jobs and Collaborations.
Oh, Casey's saying the chat is disabled, but if you,
okay.
It's disabled for the audience.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
I'm sharing it right here. Yeah. So
And I think we also have Deborah waiting to jump in.
come on in, Deborah.
Thank you very much for inviting me in. I'm a practicing psychoanalyst and psychotherapist in Los Angeles, and I found your film to be just wonderful. There are so many powerful stories and wonderful examples of women finding their own authentic voice. My question is, how on earth were you able to let go of so many hours of film, from 300 hours and stories? How on earth were you able to do that?
Yeah, it was very hard. Thank you so much for your kind words. And I love your beautiful background. This is both of your backgrounds. I need to learn how to do that. This is awesome. It was a challenge, you know. I think it was, I don't even know how to answer that question other than sort of like those logistical things that we talked about, like the bubble map and the binder full of the gold script. That really made a huge difference in just really trying to distill. I will say, I think what we ended up keeping was stories that we had heard over and over again from all different kinds of women. So like, you know, you see XYZ woman in the film talking about this. Well, we chose to put that there because we heard 50 other women in our own personal lives talking about that same thing. And we thought, wow, this is something that's not only resonates with us personally, but this resonates with all kinds of other people too. So I think that really helped us distill it, just the stuff that we felt like, yeah, would really resonate with the most people, I guess.
Deborah,
Thank you, that's helpful.
we have a saying in documentary filmmaking, because it's common to shoot hundreds of hours. Unfortunately, now with digital, even 1,000 hours, which is crazy. So we have all these kinds of sayings like "kill your darlings," you know, and sometimes people will get graphic because they'll say like "drown your puppies." It's just terrible, you know, "kill your babies," whatever. But I think it's about, you know, you have an hour and a half. This film's I think an hour and 41 minutes. But you know, you're taking people on a narrative journey. And you just start to, I don't know, everyone has a different editorial process, but I know for myself, it's very common in documentaries to have very long first assemblies, 3 or 4 or 5 hour assemblies, and you just start to whittle it down and you start to shape it, you know, because there is, whether or not people subscribe to the idea of what is typically called 3-act structure, films exist in time. There's a beginning, a middle, and end. And there's certain things you need to do in the beginning of a film to get people on board, and certain things you need to do to increase the complexity and keep them with you on the ride, and things you need to do to wrap it up. So I mean, you know, 3-year edit, that's, it's hard to tame the dragon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Holly, I think people are asking you to put in the chat. Did you? Oh, you did it already. Okay, great. How are we doing on time, Alex?
Good, though we don't have any more audience questions, so I think on that note,
I have at least one more question if we have time.
Oh, of course.
So Holly, I'm so impressed by your sort of mix of creativity and entrepreneurialism, and your website is terrific. I would be great if you'd put the website into the chat so people could see it. And I really encourage people to check out the website for the Goddess Project, because it's a really sort of a classic model to get people involved. There's different kinds of, you call them toolkits, right? There's different ways of buying a license to the film. So maybe I think it was up to 20 people. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because you provide on your website a lot of different ways that people can sort of partake or host a screening of your film.
Yeah, so that's something, thank you for that compliment, by the way. The website's something that's been through thousands of iterations and changes, as I'm sure you know, like always trying to figure out the best way to get the message across. But what we found with the screenings is that so often people just didn't want the film to end. They wanted to continue the energy that it provided. They wanted to further connect with the people in the theater with them. They wanted to, we had so many women who wanted to like create, you know, educational programs just from the chapters of the film and like break them up and each week meet over a different chapter. We've just had so many people reach out to us, whether it be like university professors or, you know, people who run women's shelters. We've screened the film in prisons, just so many different parts of society that we really wanted to be able to create resources to help with that. So that's why we've created sort of like the virtual screening kits. And those have, a discussion guide and activity guides where you can sort of take the messages from the film and apply them to your own life, in the future.
And so
watching it.
For the audience who we can't see, but if you check out the website, you can see the licenses are sort of progressively increase in audience numbers. So the cost of the license increases, but then you go from anywhere from, I think, 20 to maybe 300 or 400 people or 500 people. So I thought it was really smartly done. So we have fellow Professor Midge Costin.
Oh, hi, Midge.
Hi, Holly. Holly's in 310. And did sound an amazing job on a documentary. Holly, I love the film, and I didn't know it was your film. But when I saw the trailer, it was like, I have to see this film. It was so uplifting. You know what I'm wondering is, one of the things I loved about it was it veers into kind of the spiritual and healing. Is that kind of your nature or your film partner's nature, or did that happen as a result of just the interviews? And was that kind of a natural thing? But it was such good work, Holly. Oh my God, 300 hours. I had 200 and felt I was buried. Congratulations. Wow. That's fantastic.
Thank you. It is somewhat my nature. I think I consider myself just like, I believe there is a higher power than us. And like throughout my life, I always sort of felt frustrated with God being seen as a man. Mm-hmm. And I never really understood why God is a man. Like, why is it always he? Why is he always a man? Why, if, man and woman are equal, where's the goddess? And so that's sort of where the name of the project came from, is like, where is the silent partner to God? And throughout history, throughout religion, throughout so many facets of society, women's voices have been held back and silenced. So while the project really, it has spiritual undertones, I think that is partially a result of like our own, like seeking something bigger than ourselves, of just like, wanting to connect to something bigger than ourselves, but not knowing particularly what that was, but knowing that we wanted a feminine element to it. Like, where is this, throughout history, as the film says, like, women have been there side by side, giving birth, taking care and nurturing. And we just felt like that was something that was so missing, and I think has been missing from religion and so many forms of spirituality. So yeah, I consider myself somewhat spiritual, but I would say that the interviews really drove that. I think calling it the Goddess Project, people started to sort of think in that way of like, yeah, why is God a man? And that's just a question I continue to ask people to challenge themselves. Like, does God have a gender? And not that he's a woman either, I don't know, or he, see, I even say it because you're just conditioned. But yeah, this power bigger than ourselves, which some of us believe and some of us don't, but why in so many religions is this power seen as a male force? I don't know, but that's something I definitely wanted to challenge and undo a little bit.
Yeah, really nice job. Thank you for the film.
Thank you.
Rick, would you like to join us on camera to ask your question? Are you with us? Rick, are you there?
I think I am now. I'm his wife, Sherry. And my question was just, I was curious if you were able to interview any leaders, any community elected officials, or, women who are in office is my point.
No, I wish. I really wish we could. Like I said, I feel like there's, oh, I think I'm getting a feedback. From yours. Okay.
Rick, do you mind muting your audio?
Sorry. Yeah, so I think there's so many women, of course, and sort of like careers that I wanted to highlight that we didn't, but women in office is something that I feel like is something of, like, there needs to be a whole film just about the women who are brave enough to step in as our elected officials. And I think now, since we started this film, as a society, we've grown leaps and bounds. There's so many more women in positions of power, and diverse women, and trans people. And, you know, I think that we are really starting to evolve, or we've always been evolving, but things are getting sped up with the internet and just how fast we translate information to each other. But no, we did not, to summarize.
Sherry, there's a wonderful film that I think is still on PBS. It's called And She Could Be Next. And it was about a bunch of women that ran. Okay, you've seen it. Yeah, I highly recommend that film.
I think I've seen it. I should go back and look at it again. Thank you very much. Love the film.
Thank you. I'm going to write that one down too.
There's another question by Hermione. Will there be a part 2?
Ooh. We'll see. So yeah, part of what brought me to USC is just kind of like trying to figure out the stories that I want to tell next. This documentary took so much personally, professionally, just mentally and physically from me that and I also felt so like I said in the beginning, this responsibility to create it. So when it was done, I felt such a weight lifted off my shoulders. But then immediately, that's what everyone always asks, like, what's next? Or what's, you know, is there a part 2? And I'm not sure. I don't think it would look the same. I think I've learned a lot from this film and making it. And I think one thing I learned, unfortunately or fortunately for filmmakers, is that like in modern times, people really want to digest something faster. So I would maybe make it into a series or, you know, maybe another form. I still do have so much unused footage and gold from the project that, yeah, maybe I'll dive back into. But now in my life, I'm kind of looking at, you know, what's next. I feel like also on that note, at the time we started this project, it felt like no one was telling women's stories. No one was having these conversations, you know, and nowadays you watch the news, you look at even today, International Women's Day, the amount of companies and corporations. And on one hand, it's sad because they're just really using it to sell us stuff, but that are celebrating International Women's Day and celebrating diversity and representation. I feel like that's such a part of our society now that I feel less of a responsibility to do that and more, you know, like I feel like I can expand the horizons. Whereas when I first started this project, I thought, wow, I'm only going to ever tell stories about women because this is lacking. Now I feel like, okay, I did this and a lot of other people see the need for this and they're doing it too. So maybe I'll do more, or maybe I'll, you know, go into, I don't know. I really love travel content, like in the sense that I just really love experiencing different people and their culture and their wisdom. And that's sort of like one direction I know I want to go is just like trying to bring more diverse stories to people that maybe don't get a chance to experience those kind of lifestyles.
Hermione, did you have a follow-up question to that? Is there a particular part of part 2 that you would like to see? I'm not sure if she's still with us.
Yeah, typically when it's actually just the microphone, it might be a little tough for her to join us live.
Okay. Well, I think I've asked most of my questions. I'm sure I'll have some follow-up questions at the end. I just wanted to say there was one moment I really loved, which was, I think the woman was a flight attendant, and she says the only thing that she hadn't done was to hop on a freighter. And then unexpectedly, you cut to these women who were really hopping on freighters. I thought that was an incredible moment. It was really fun. And that was a surprise. I love it when as an audience member, I'm surprised in a film.
Thank you so much. That is definitely one of my favorite parts. She was one of my favorite characters. And when she said that, my jaw was on the floor. I was like, that was the last thing I ever thought. And, you know, she actually made me think, wow, maybe I should hop a freighter. But then for once, this scene in particular, actually, before we found the perfect animator to illustrate, that train animation. I actually went to go film some B-roll with my boyfriend trying to run next to a freight train as B-roll. And it was so terrifying running on those slippery rocks next to the train that I was like, I will never train up, despite her advice. I'm not going to pursue that. But I love that that's the one thing she felt like she missed out on, and that someone else we interviewed had that experience as the most magical memory of their life. So it really lined up.
That was remarkable, because it's one thing to hear someone say, gee, I wish I'd been a hobo or hopped a freight train, but then to actually meet women who had done it was really something. Well, did I hear right? You're in 310, you're in school now here?
Yes.
Oh, I did not realize that. Well, welcome. I look forward to seeing your 310. That's an unusual trajectory, make a feature documentary and then go to film school.
Yeah, people say that, but there's like completely being self-taught, like there's so much to learn. And I feel like I made a lot of mistakes that I'm trying to avoid in my next projects. and beyond that, I've sort of always been sort of like a DIY person, and I really came here to connect with other people that are like equally passionate about storytelling, and hopefully find the collaborators that I'll make my next projects with.
I think film school is such a great place. It's such a hothouse immersion. It is a great place to find your creative tribe. It was for me. Yeah, I think there's another question. I was going to say in part 2, I'd like to see the youngest women more.
Yeah, for sure.
It's funny because I also really enjoyed seeing the 78-year-old women. I'm nowhere near that, but I really enjoyed her spirit a lot.
Absolutely. I feel like they're like in society, I think they say it at one part in the film, but there does tend to be a focus on younger people's stories. So something that came out of this film for me actually is recognizing how important it is to tell older people's stories. And that's, I don't want to divulge my future projects, but that is something that I'm working on. That's been a huge theme coming out of this, is just how much wisdom there is in these people that are older than us, that have had more life experience, and how often that's just pushed away. Like, you've aged out of your job or your beauty or your this or your that. And, so many of these people aren't going to be on this planet for much longer. So I think that we have a lot to learn from them. And they've, to think someone that could be born in the 20s or 30s is still alive today. Like, I can't even imagine, watching how fast everything changes. But yeah, I think everyone always wants to see themselves. So the younger people want to see more younger people, and then the older people want to see more older people. And so that's why we try to have like a wide range. But I agree. I think more projects need to be made like this. And I think they need to be made for people of all ages, so that you can see a lot of different people that you relate to, and that you can hear from people going through the same struggles, because it helps. It really does.
You certainly could turn this into a series, but I think that's sort of a classic creative dilemma, that you have a successful project and then you're ready to move on because you've so deeply internalized and grappled with the material, the content and the subjects and the themes in a film, right? And then the audience, it's great, the audience wants more, but you're kind of done with it, right? It's a very classic filmmaker, I found, filmmaker experience.
Yeah, I'm curious. I would love to hear from you. Just, I've actually seen your documentary that you made and I loved it. And I would just love to hear, I've never had any of your classes or anything, but maybe, I don't know if you have any advice for me or anything that maybe you could impart, because you obviously have done much more than I have. And I hope to have a long lasting career in this.
Well, thank you for your kind words about, I guess you mean awake, but the advice I usually give is to follow your passions, and you've already done that. But so then the second part of the advice that I usually give to students, but I have to actually remind myself too, which is to protect your authentic voice, to protect your creative voice, because we're so deluged 24/7 by content and social media. And there's so many distractions right now that it can be very hard to stay in touch with your voice. And so I always encourage students, like, you have to learn how to hear your creative voice, how to protect it, how to nurture it, how to grow it. yeah, and then how to protect it so that you can put it into your work. And it's hard, it can be very hard to resist, you know, our process, as you know. If I didn't realize you were here at SCA, and you're welcome to come to my office hours, you know, come anytime and talk. But that it's, yeah, we give a lot of notes, right? There's a lot of feedback sessions in the model of the kind of collaborative filmmaking that we make here at SCA. And so that's its own lesson, is to learn how to hear feedback, right? And how to sort of filter it and sift it and know why different people are giving you different kinds of feedback. And yeah, so that's all part of like sort of protecting your inner voice. So that's all. I mean, you've really done the hard work already by following your passion, and here you are, right?
Yeah, but it feels good to hear that as a reminder, because I think, you know, when it gets hard, you almost can silence your own intuition or inner voice. But that's, like, on that note, is the biggest part that this project has taught me. People always ask, like, what is the biggest lesson you learned? But it's really following your intuition, and that goes from making the film and all the technical aspects, but also just like surviving as a young woman living in a bus, like parking in sketchy areas around the United States for 6 months. You know, it's like, at any point, if my body says no, it's a no. And like, making this film has taught me a yes is a yes and a no is a no. And like, exactly as you said, you have to like listen deep down and figure out a way to clarify that for yourself, because I feel like that's what we all need to follow, our own voice, not everyone else's.
Yeah, well said. I don't know, is there anything else that you want to leave our community with, our students, or?
I don't think so. So if you enjoyed this film, or you're a student or alumni or anything, please reach out. I would just love to connect with more storytellers and more people. And yeah, if you have any questions or need advice with what I've done, I can, you know, I'd be happy to help anyone however I could. So I'm here. And I think, I don't know, I put it in the chat, but I'm not sure. I'm on Instagram at HOLLI.Rae.
Holly,
Okay.
put it in the chat again,
Okay.
but just make sure to switch to panelists and attendees.
I see. So I'll leave that in the chat, and that's a great way. Or you can email me through my website, and I'm here if anyone needs me.
And I would just say, because you're being so polite not to, that if anyone else would like to host a screening to share this wonderful film with their own community, your own community, you can do that by going to the film's website. And she didn't pay me to say that.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Alex. I mean, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. And Alex, your events are like literally getting me through this pandemic right now. So thank you for putting so much TLC into everything you organize.
That's my pleasure. And the fact that I get to put on events with students who have made feature films is pretty cool. So thank you for joining us, particularly on this day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Lisa. So we'll see hopefully everyone soon, and have a great night.